Hi, everybody. Welcome. Thank you for joining us today for our DEI roundtable discussion on inclusivity in the Bardic Arts. We have a great panel for you, and we're going to talk about a lot of different topics around this area of discussion. Before we get started, I want to go ahead and give a quick disclaimer that none of us are representing the SCA or the society proper. We're members of the known world that have stepped forward to engage in a roundtable discussion. And it's our hope that this forum will aid in further conversations to assist in developing a positive culture with diversity, equity, and inclusion in various local kingdoms, groups, and the society as a whole. The views and opinions expressed by the panel participants are their current opinions and do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of the SCA Incorporated, and no one on the panel has been asked to or is being assumed to represent any community at large. They're speaking on their personal experiences and opinions. With that being said, my name is Olivia. I'm from Atlantia, and it's a pleasure to be here with you today. Thank you so much for joining us. And let's go ahead and get started. I'm really excited about our conversation, and I want to go ahead and let our group introduce themselves. So, panel, if you would.
Hello, my name is Andreas. I've been in the SCA for about 31, 32 years. I've been a bard for most of that time, a poet and a herald, and I was recognized as a pelican a little over a year ago.
Hello, everyone. I'm Guoillauc, filius Brancu. My pronouns are they, them. I'm from the Kingdom of Ealdormere, and the barony I'm in Ramshaven is in mundane terms, the traditional territory of the Haudenosaunee and Anishinaabe peoples. And people have been telling me that I can keep showing up to Bardic things for about 5 years now, so I'm going to accept that. I'm very happy to be here, and I'm very happy to be in those circles.
Nilse, greetings. My name is Teuctli, Tenochcacuicatl Delmar. You can simply call me Lord Tenoch. I've been in the SCA for about, it's going to be about 3 years now. I hail from the Kingdom of Ansteorra, where I serve as the current Kingdom Bard. And as you can tell from my name, I do a lot of work involving what's often called the New World or Period America, and reflecting Indigenous identity within the SCA.
Hello, my name is Emer Aidan. I hail from Ealdormere, which is mundanely Ontario, Canada. I have been involved in the society for over 25 years. Most all of that, I've been heavily involved with the Bardic community and the Bardic Arts. I feel very passionately about that, and I'm looking forward to this discussion today.
Diahuit, I am Lanea Inyanui Karagon, and I hail from the northern reaches of Atlantia. I grew up in the SCA, so I've been in for decades. We'll leave the number of decades out for now. I particularly perform and write material from a feminist basis. I'm very opposed to empires. It's kind of my shtick, and I'm happy to do what I can to help improve accessibility to bards all over the SCA.
Thank you all so much. So with that, let's go ahead and set forth some ground definitions for some of the things that we're going to be talking about today.
Okay, so one of the big One of the big things we are not discussing today is the general question of what makes a bard, or what truly is the Bardic Arts. We're not going to touch that with a 10-foot pole. But for baseline, when we talk about the Bardic Arts, we are pulling back a little from the general umbrella of all performing arts, though that will be discussed further. When we talk about a Bardic circle, what we are talking about generally is a venue focused around a fire, generally outside. If we talk about other Bardic spaces or venues, we may be talking about a feast hall, a competition space, or other places where the Bardic Arts are performed publicly. I'll let other people get into things further.
And speaking of venues, something that can happen is what is known in some spaces and places as hostage Bardic, where no one signed up to listen to that particular performance. One way or another, the person is not reading the space, they are not reading the room, and they are not picking up on that everyone really needs them to stop. We'll be getting into aspects of that and neurodiversity later on.
Thank you so much for going ahead and setting those things out. So let's talk about inclusivity, because that's an important thing for us to get into first. So how can we incorporate a wider range of performing traditions and repertoires from different eras and cultures and those of medieval, Western, and Northern Europe?
So we've been talking about this quite a lot internally in the group and in other spaces where bards get together and talk. And my baseline for this basically just is the governing documents of the SCA make it quite clear that the SCA is for any medieval culture anywhere in the world. And because it is our mission to learn and to teach, as it were, being welcoming of cultures and performance styles that you're not familiar with is part of the deal. And so I just feel like people should try to recognize that and be welcoming of people who come in the door and have something a little bit different to offer.
So this in particular is a subject I feel very passionately about because as I mentioned before, I do a lot of work on period American New World repertoire and performance and what have you. And there's kind of like two attitudes about it that I've noticed quite often is either it needs to be in its own space in a separate but equal sense, or, it can be allowed in of any general circumstance, any general circle, but you have to kind of read the room to see if people are ready for it. And these are both not the best ways of going about it, in my opinion. For me personally, I grew up a bilingual person. I grew up listening to musical works in multiple languages. I grew up in a community that had people that had performances in multiple languages I didn't speak. If you're in a classical music world, performances are often in languages you don't speak natively. So I feel like it's a very reasonable thing to say that we should be pretty accepting to performances that may not be easily recognizable and what have you. Have you heard a skald perform in Faroese? Like, it's breathtaking. I don't speak Faroese, but it's breathtaking to hear that kind of stuff. And I think that there definitely is a place for just this multicultural diversity in the SCA. It doesn't have to be a separate but equal event where the event is sanctioned for this type of performance. I think it could be very easily integrated it's all about just allowing people to do the thing. It's as simple as that, just telling people they can do the thing. And you'll notice the more they do the thing, more people are interested in seeing people do the thing more and more often. That's how visibility works. Once you start seeing people do the thing, suddenly people are more interested in the thing.
Absolutely. And those are really great points. So, panel, what is your opinion on the changing of pronouns in established performance pieces to make them explicitly homo-romantic or more gender inclusive?
So this is a potentially difficult topic. For traditional material where the author is unknown, uncredited, where it's anonymous, out of copyright, it's a lot easier there. It's possible to go ahead and just say, I'm going to change the pronouns of this song and turn this particular character, to have different pronouns. When it's somebody's personal work and it's somebody who's in the SCA and you want to sing their song, but you want to change the pronouns, it's important, I think, to ask if you can, the composer, the author of the piece. I think that's important because some people are going to be fine with it and some people maybe aren't going to be fine with it, but we should respect the origin of the piece from somebody who's here in the SCA now, and what they may wish to be, may wish to get across with their song.
I come from a somewhat different perspective on this. As a trans, non-binary, and queer person, and yes, I need to mention all of those, there's still precious little representation of my identities in media. It hasn't gotten much better from 821 to 2021 CE. SCA Bardec is no exception in terms of the material that's available out there. Changing pronouns and filking songs to reflect queer experiences is a decades-long and quite possibly centuries-long tradition to represent ourselves and prove that we exist. We have to change this in order to exist in Bardic spaces. And if someone is uncomfortable with gender-swapped performances, I'd suggest writing some explicitly queer songs so that we can leave your heterosexual and cisgender material alone. Give us a larger repertoire to draw from.
Thank you for those perspectives and for sharing that with us. How do you address situations that limit your ability to play due to environment or a lack of accommodations?
So, mundanely, I work a lot in musician health and safety. It's what I do my bulk of my research and my work in. And one of the bigger issues that we notice, and especially now that I've done presentations on this in the SCA, is a lot of issues are not necessarily performers themselves, but the accommodations of the event and what have you. Is the event wheelchair accessible? Are we providing spaces for, the bards and the musicians to store their items? Are they in a safe place that is going to be away from the heat and have a pavilion and protection? And some of those are things that are actually, I think, in my opinion, on the autocrats and the people organizing the events to kind of provide those accommodations. I mean, remember that the SCA is a volunteer organization vastly. So when you ask these musicians and performers and bards to come forth and do these things, I mean, they are doing that of their own goodwill. And so there needs to be a little bit more consideration, in my opinion, as to how they are treated. I mean, they're not servants. They're not there to, serve for you and perform on demand. These are people that have wants and needs. And I would really suggest that, people putting on events reach out more to their communities, reach out to the performers, and don't just expect them to kind of bring their entire equipment with them. Ask what they might need when you're arranging an event. for me personally, that's been one of the most fulfilling things. And I know that I am more happy to show up and play in a ball where I'm being taken care of and where my needs are being considered, as opposed to, a pick up and play circle where it just kind of spontaneously happens in the middle of nowhere, and no one's really looking out for the fact that maybe there's a lot of potholes and we can't step around or walk around, or maybe that fire is a little too hot for us and we should maybe not be so close to the smoke.
I completely agree with Tenoch. It can be as simple as designing the venue space, the Bardic Circle, the court, to include things like, what are the acoustics going to be? Is there enough room to safely walk to the front of the fire and back? Is there enough safe space around the fire for people to perform? Have you provided water? Very simple things that can make a world of difference for performers. We also need to be aware of other styles, other types of barriers to access that we may find. Bardic somewhat has an easier in for addressing some issues of poverty, because the idea of singing for your supper does exist in the SCA medieval-ish idea of culture and hospitality, which is a good start, although there is always more work that can be done towards letting people, without having to out themselves as destitute, to be able to still take part with an event itself. We also need to think about addressing aids to people's potential disabilities regarding performance and Bardic Arts. A really big one that I champion is not making value judgments on people who are not able to memorize pieces, or people who need to have a visual aid, or in the form of a songbook or something, to assist their performance. This is getting further acceptance into both Bardic culture and general audience for these sorts of aids is really important. That we acknowledge this. Same goes for hearing aids, visual aids, walking aids, all of those things that will help more people take place and join in.
And if I can jump in here as well. In addition to being trans and a whole bunch of queer alphabet soup, I'm also autistic. And having the time and spoons to participate, and that's something in defined spoon theory didn't expect to, having the time and mental and emotional energy to participate in social spaces is a big deal to me. And not knowing when and where something is going to happen because people expected it to simply filter through a magical grapevine of Bardic where we all know each other. Well, I'm lucky that people like Emer have done a very good job at trying to make sure that I get included in things. But had I not had a series of fortuitous events, I would probably still be wandering around campsites late in the evening, wondering where Bardic might be, because I would really like to get to sing somewhere other than karaoke. That was me in 2016. And I have a personal network, but many people don't. The more disabilities and minority statuses you have, the smaller your network tends to be, and the less connected it is to the people who decide things. So I will often pick and choose what to participate in. Everything being online is fantastic for me these days because I can decide that I'm going to just show up for half an hour of something and then get off of Zoom again. I can't do that if I have to drive half an hour or 2 hours to an event and then get home again safely. And I'd say the last part, I feel like I'm mashing everything together very quickly, but as a person who does not make eye contact comfortably, who does not stand in a way that other people are comfortable with looking at, who fidgets, who does a number of things that will point me out as autistic unless I try very hard not to, I focus on my internal satisfaction with my own performance rather than meeting other people's expectations. I cannot begin to describe how much that has done to alleviate my anxiety. I no longer need other people to accommodate me. I will come in and accommodate myself. And whether that makes for some hostage bardic situations, I don't know. But until people get more comfortable with many different ways of being in spaces, we're going to have to negotiate and compromise.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, everyone, for sharing your individual perspectives on that. I think that those were very important for all of us to think about. So I just want to take a moment here to point out that these questions were submitted by the Society for the panel to consider. And please, if you have questions as we go along, feel free to go ahead and put them in the Facebook comments. We have some great moderators, including Zara, our corporate DEI officer, who's keeping an eye on those for us. And we'll get to them whenever we finish with the pre-submitted questions. But the submitter of this next question gave some background before they asked their specific question. So this is from the perspective of the person who submitted the question. And they wrote, my perception of the unwritten rules of the Bardic Arts include that one must perform solo, short pieces that fit in the expected norms, singing, poetry, or possibly an instrumental piece. Other performing art styles are tolerated occasionally within the Bardic environments if a high-ranking person wants it so. My question for the panel is, how do you suggest changing the Bardic environment from just occasional tolerance of non-traditional Bardic performance to genuinely support them?
So we've tried a number of different tactics in Atlantia to try to open things up to people who would previously have maybe felt less welcome in Bardic. One of the things we've done is take the focus off of competition and instead use a format we borrowed from North Shield and the Mid, which is Bardic Madness. So rather than having a very set competition that everybody must meet some brief to engage in, we encourage a variety of different people to offer challenges for performers to meet in whatever way best suits their interest or their material or their performance style. Another thing that has helped a lot is communication before an event to let people know that we're going to have Bardic space at a given time and place, and that all are welcome, and to encourage discussion between those who would perform and the host to make sure that whatever we hosts can do to make things easier and more comfortable for people who are coming to perform pieces, particularly unusual pieces, have space and feel welcome to do that. Something that we do have to consider, and this is where that the guest host situation comes into play, is that often in order to make space for a lot of people to perform, we do have to follow time limits. And I know time limits are really frustrating for people who like to do longer form pieces, but there are times when we have to choose the good of access for many over allowing one longer period of access for fewer participants. And then we also just need to reach out to people for feedback after an event, so that if we do something that makes it difficult for somebody to perform a piece that is important to them but is less standard in terms of what the SCA views Bardic, we can make it better for the next time. We're all going to make mistakes as hosts and as guests, but being willing to listen to members of the community or would-be members of the community and members of the audience to see what sparks interest in them, where they feel welcome or where they feel less welcome, and we need to apologize and do better. I think that communication is really key.
I agree. And I wanted to sort of add on, I guess, sort of 2 points that I've been thinking about. The first of which is in at least my general area of the SCA, which is sort of the eastern half, I guess, of the United States, we tend to draw a dotted line relationship between Bardic and performing arts. And so what that has lent itself to is, while Bardic circles themselves might be pretty much Bardic oriented, we've started to build a culture of concerts, concerts by just a set individual or a set group, as well as concerts that are just, sign up and perform 2 pieces, and then somebody else is going to perform 2 pieces. And so we've been doing that a lot. And we talk a lot about, Owen Allen's not on the panel, but one of the things that he loves to talk about is venue and finding the right venue for a performance. Because sometimes I think it's easy to say, oh, well, the Bardic Circle doesn't want me because I do theater, or the Bardic Circle doesn't want me because I do drumming. Sometimes the venue just doesn't meet the needs of the performance, and we want you to have the best performance that you can have. And so if you're in a space where there's not, a ton of room for a troupe of 3 or 4 actors to put on even a 4 or 5 minute scene, then it might not work. But one thing that Bardic Circle hosts can do is specifically advertise the kinds of performances that they're looking for. And I don't mean that to say so that lets them exclude people, but certainly as somebody who sometimes performs longer stories, or who sometimes does more theater, I'd like to know if a circle is not going to be necessarily the right place for me to perform a certain kind of thing, because then I'm not in the position of making everybody uncomfortable, including myself. And I'm not going to call that hostage Bardic necessarily, because it's I don't think it's hostage necessarily, but it's sometimes it just doesn't fit, and that's okay. It's okay for things to sometimes not fit in every single space. And then that also, if we can encourage our hosts to be very open about the kinds of things that they're looking for, they will, we can encourage them to open their ideas about what else could take place at this circle. Hey, this space is pretty big. You could put on a show if you wanted to. You could have a chorus perform if you wanted to. We got enough room to do that. Let's talk about that. And that gives people an opportunity to think about things that they might not normally expect to say, oh, well, this could work here.
Thank you. So this next question has multiple questions in one, but we're going to try to tackle it all together. So how are you addressing generational diversity for both younger and elder discrimination? How are we addressing disparity between folks who have been in the society for decades versus folks who are more recently coming into the society? And how can we address the cultural divide between Scadian generations?
So this one's gonna get very personal very quickly, unfortunately, because when I came into the society, I was doing, I am doing this new old work, and that was before there were statements made by the society at the corporate level about being inclusive, but that's before we had the most recent change to definitively say that yes, the entire world in period is allowed in the SCA, and because of that, I had a lot of resistance to what I did, and because perceptively, the people that are going to be in this gatekeeping end are typically people who are established players, perceptively from older generations. However, I have also had people who were literal founders of the society and playing in the single-digit years who have sought me out now that we do everything virtually, and specifically addressed me and said that we heard what you do and we love it. And I've had them tell me to stay angry and to keep fighting. So I think that oftentimes when you talk about these these divides, we're talking about experiences we had with one or two bad people at either end of that spectrum. And we have to kind of keep in mind that, you know, not everybody is our enemy in that regard. The quote unquote old guard is not all bad. The quote unquote new guard or newbies are not trying to change everything. There are people all across the spectrum on both ends of that. And part of that, I think, is finding a middle ground and that we can really learn and grow from one another, because some of the best Bardic circles I've been in have been mixed circles with newcomers and people that have been here for decades. It's about having an open mind and being able to learn from one another at the end of the day. But it's also remembering and being firm about the fact that, you know, progress is good. The fact that we are growing is good. So, you know, don't necessarily not champion that. Don't necessarily back down from that. Just not everybody is your enemy in this regard. At least that's what I have personally learned from this. And again, I am speaking personally, so this is a very personal perspective on the matter. I think that this would be very different for everyone in regards to how they've experienced it. And as we said, this is multiple questions in one. So it's very difficult to try to condense a lot of stuff into this one.
Yeah, I agree. And also, I mean, this is a question that could really be put to the larger society, the larger SCA in general. There could be an entire DEI session on this, right? An entire panel just on addressing generational diversity and the generational diversity of how old physically are you, and then the generational diversity of what generation of the SCA are you a member of, which isn't split up as easily as potentially as sort of age-based generations. But, you know, I have a dependent who's, you know, older than I am by a little bit, and she's very new to the SCA. And so she tends to come across in text, certainly, as somebody who might be a little bit younger than she actually is, because she's asking questions about stuff that she doesn't know. I think that for the most part, I'm going to argue that the people who need to make sure that they are reaching out the most are the people like me, people who have been in the SCA for a long time and are also older. I'm past 50, so I consider myself older these days. But it's our, you know, it's our job, I think, to reach out to the people who are newer and are maybe still finding their way. I just think that you know, we know where we are, we understand where we're putting our feet, and not everybody does. And so I think it's our job to act as people who are going to be more welcoming, and people who are going to reach out their hand and say, hey, would you like to try something? As opposed to, you know, somebody who's very new who doesn't necessarily even know how to ask the question.
Absolutely. Thank you both for taking on the challenge of tackling that question. I think you did a great job. So staying with our theme in this section of inclusivity, how do we tackle inclusivity in the Bardic community when, at least in some spaces, there seems to be a divide in the Bardic community itself about gatekeeping who is or isn't considered a bard?
So I'll reiterate again, we are not going to try to define what the word bard is tonight. That's its own thing. But I think when it comes to those of us who are already engaged within the Bardic Arts community, it's important for us to keep reaching our hand out to people who look like they might be interested, people who come and talk to you about a poem that they've written, people who sing enthusiastically along with sing-alongs, people who have a persona that might have a more unique art that could be included into the fold in a Bardic space, and just continuing to help people work past their own barriers of stage fright and imposter syndrome. I mean, I still have imposter syndrome. I still don't know why all the cool kids let me play with them sometimes. We all have our own barriers inside that tell us, oh, maybe I'm not bard enough. But really what it comes down to, I think, is paying attention to people who are around you, paying attention to people who seem like they are enthusiastic about Bardic Arts and Bardic Art things, and really trying our best to welcome these people and support them in the ways that they need.
So I like to remind people that not every Bardic Circle is the final round of a Kingdom Championship. Not every Bardic Circle, not every Bardic performance has to be the most spectacular, fully polished, this is your best work, this is the cream of the crop performance. We all had to start somewhere. I am wearing a hood tonight because I'm representing my kingdom, and it is something that I'm very proud to do. I did not wake up, and I did not enter the society wearing this hood. It took some work to get here, and part of that meant finding Bardic circles that I was comfortable learning my craft and trying to figure out what I actually was about, because I did not start fully fleshed as the bard that I am now. I needed to explore and have that space. And I think that it's something that we need to address more, is making sure that, you know, we kind of let people know that Bardic circles are these safe spaces for people to try to hone a craft. We're not naming the champion bard in every Bardic circle ever. And I think virtual Bardic circles have, for the most part, I mean, you know, mileage will vary here, but I think that there's been some really good examples of people trying out new material and sharing new material and sharing bard books and learning from one another. Having that virtual sense of community that we do now, in my opinion, has really helped the Bardic Arts grow tremendously, because I've learned so many pieces I never would have learned had I not had this opportunity, and vice versa. People have asked me for my own pieces. You know, it's actually not that hard to not gatekeep. It's as simple as, you know, just kind of being open-minded and letting people just explore the space. And of course, you know, we do need to remember being respectful to one another. So I don't want to say that we should just allow anything. Like, that's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is we need to be a little bit more open-minded and okay with the fact that, you know, we are exploring a hobby. This is a recreational activity for most people. So, you know, sometimes people are going to read out of a book, or they're going to flub a few notes, and that's fine. Like I said, this isn't a competition. This is just a friendly gathering of people. You know, if you want camaraderie, you need to share camaraderie. We're bards. What kind of story do you want people to tell of you at the end of the day?
Something that I've come to as I've gotten older and gained some primacy in the community here in Atlantia is I'm not scared to be the person who steps in a bully's face and makes them sit down. And I think that's my job. Not specifically my job, it's not only my job, but certainly if I see someone who is discouraging another person from performing, I try to stand up for the person who deserves time and space to participate in this community of ours. And often when people are gatekeeping, there's a reason behind it, and it's almost always that we are all wounded little birds of our own. And sometimes we need to do a little bit of social work within the SCA and take someone aside and gently ask what's going on, why they're acting out, why they're reacting cruelly to someone. If they're aware that they're reacting cruelly, why do they continue to do it? And it's not easy. Sometimes it's quite unpleasant. Sometimes you find out that someone you thought was a relatively good person is really kind of terrible. And that part is not enjoyable. But certainly those of us who have participated long enough or excelled in whatever way that has given us awards of import or status as officers owe it to the rest of the community to stand up in those moments and say something. So I hope that lots of people feel empowered to do that, because we are all equally in charge of the SCA. We're all chatelaines. We're all here to help the society continue and improve. So that's what I try to do.
Absolutely. Thank you all so much for sharing your perspective on that. Let's switch gears slightly. And I'd like to ask this. What would help deaf or hard of hearing folks participate or enjoy Bardic more?
So I'm going to go ahead and begin by addressing hard of hearing and hearing loss, because or those who have language processing issues, because that is something I directly have a little bit more experience with in the work that I do mundanely. There are a lot of devices that can be used. Some people want to use hearing aids. There's amplification devices that can be used in events to help others hear. As well as the fact that there are various tools that can be used to help people that have sensory issues where maybe certain frequencies are bad. Allowing people to use those things is important. Some of the resistance I've run into when discussing that is that it's not very period looking and it takes away from the aesthetic. But I always remind people that health matters first. And so caring about people's health is more important, in my opinion, than trying to emphasize and enforce aesthetic on others. And when it comes to things like language and issues and processing, if you as a performer want to make your presentation a little bit more accessible, one of the best advices I always got from a skald was, making sure that, you are emoting with your hands and you are telling the story, that I do a lot of work in languages that are not easy for people to understand. Most people don't speak the language. And so my body ends up being a canvas, and that's one way I've been able to help communicate the stuff I do. And it's helpful for people with language processing issues as well to kind of see that and be able to follow that story that way. In regards to the deaf community, oftentimes communities are frustrated because they are spoken for and not considered on their own, and they are not allowed to speak on their own. I think this is one of those cases where we're asked what we can do for the deaf community, but how many of us are actually reaching out to the deaf community to hear from them firsthand what they actually want us to do? I think this is one of those things where, it's not about, we often use me-centric language is what I mean in reference to like how we can help others in this regard. And I don't necessarily feel qualified to discuss anything further in regards of like, you should do this, or you should do that, or you should do this, because even people that work with deaf communities such as silent heralds will often say, they can speak for themselves, they still have language and they still communicate. And so that's one of those things that I would definitely say this is one of those areas where you should probably reach out to the community and hear what they actually want and need from us.
I won't be saying anything that's wildly different from what was just said, but I'm a pretty low-tech person sometimes, so maybe some more of my ideas can dodge the "but it's not" period concern. And I would absolutely agree. This question really needs two different answers. One for small d deaf and hard of hearing individuals versus capital D deaf communities. For those who simply have differences in hearing, quiet spaces, paying attention to acoustics, making sure that performers' faces can be clearly seen for lip reading, and providing lyrics ahead of time can help deeply. Identifying yourself whenever you begin to speak, especially in a dark space, can help a lot. And that's something I meant to do whenever I started to speak on this Zoom call. So this is Guoillauc speaking. And these things help me too. because on top of everything else, I also have a central auditory processing difference. That means I can often hear everything around me and I can't filter out background distractions very well. People chatting in the background during a performance makes things wildly difficult for me, whether I'm performing or just trying to listen. However, it is deeply problematic, in my opinion, to talk about including a community that may not want to play our game. I need everyone here to understand that deaf culture exists, it thrives, it is vibrant, and it does not need us. Deaf theater, deaf song, and poetry are their own traditions and do not need to be included by hearing folks to be valid. Very much like how the SCA should interact respectfully with other cultural communities, we must, if we want to have healthy, awesome, capital D deaf performances in SCA Bardic spaces, we must approach deaf performance communities with humility and an eagerness to meet in the middle and make something beautiful and new for all of us.
Thank you so much for both of you for sharing your points on that. There are moments where I feel like I need to pause and give our viewers a chance to rewind what they're watching, if they're watching this recorded, so they can watch a moment again. And I feel like this is one of those chances where, do you need a minute to watch that again and hear what was just said again and process that? Because that was really powerful and those were really great points. Thank you. So let's move on here. What should the proper protocol be when inclusivity in the Bardic Arts is met with resistance? Who will handle these issues as they crop up?
So the real answer is all of us. The Bardic community isn't like heavy fighting or archery or even specifically an ANS competition. There are no Bardic marshals, although maybe there should be. There's no authorization to be a bard. There's no rules about hosting a Bardic circle. So it is all of our responsibility in Bardic, just like in everything else, to work to support diversity and equity and inclusion. I will say that I feel the people who wear medallions like these and the medallions that Lanea wears, which you'll get to see when she talks about this in a minute, and the people who wear other peerage medallions, we are obligated to speak out. That's my personal interpretation of the oath of peerage, but I believe that peers are called upon and are obligated to speak up in this way. So if something happens and it's not taken care of in a manner that satisfies you when it happens, you can certainly report it, and it will be addressed as best as it can be. And I can't speak for every kingdom and every officer, every DEI officer, every seneschal, and speak to that. But if the hope is that when it happens is when it will be addressed immediately, and somebody will stand up and say, "No, that's not right. We're not going to let you do that, and we're gonna allow this person to participate, and we're going to be good with that."
Something that we've had a lot of success with, which I am absolutely sure is not anything that we invented here at Atlantia, is the phrases, "We don't do that here," or "We don't use that language here." We try to make it very clear that there are certain things that are just not tolerated in Bardic spaces in Atlantia. And I'm sure that we are better at being careful when we're doing official things. But I think making it clear as you're advertising for a Bardic at an event that you welcome diverse voices, that you want to hear from the entire SCA community, and that you want to know what you can do to help people from a variety of different backgrounds and viewpoints and experiences and genders to feel welcome and included helps. And we just have to reinforce that over and over again, that we, the people who are hosting and the people who are coming together as members of this community, want it to be better. We demand it to be better. And anyone who fights that is going to find themselves shown the door.
Absolutely. Thank you. So how do we ensure the Bardic Arts is inclusive and welcoming to the trans community?
All right, this is the point where you regret letting me on the panel. No, wait, we probably already had one of those. So there's more to it than giving our pronouns when we introduce ourselves and producing more queer content, although those are fantastic places to start. As a Western society, Western, Eurocentric society, we have deeply ingrained concepts of what a male voice and a female voice sound like. And that impacts us in the trans performing community in deep and painful ways. Though we can often control our voices to sound like what others expect when speaking, our singing voices often mark us immediately, and the sudden surprised glances when we let out those first notes are like daggers in our flesh. Choral singing is especially painful for many of us. They're reminders that we may never fit with the roles that we most identify with. Biology is what it is, but attitudes and language can change. Please let people sort themselves by their vocal range, not by gender, and don't question it. Please stop saying lords and ladies and reminding us non-binary folks that the SCA was founded on deeply gendered principles where men fight and women cheer them on. Please provide us vocal training. If that is a thing you are able to spend 5 minutes in a class, give us some stuff about how to expand our ranges. It's something that's vastly expensive in mundane spaces. It is one of the best gifts you can give us as an ally. But beyond that, as I say, as an ally, make friends with trans people and invite us in to Bardic spaces where we're probably excluding ourselves for fear of judgment. Support us. Give us space to fret about our voices and whether or not this garb covers the things we need it to cover. Learn our pronouns and correct others when they mess up. And get involved as a trans ally, please, in every aspect of your life, not just SCA Bardic. And that's how we can show up safely, because we know you're safe.
So again, I'm going to begin with that disclaimer about this is one of those issues where I feel like people are speaking for a community and on behalf of a community and not necessarily working with that community in many ways. You know, I cannot speak to this with the personal affect that you know that we did, because I myself am not trans. So I mean, this is not something that I can speak to that personal regard. But you know, my partner's trans, and I was one of the first bards that brought me into the SCA was non-binary, or is non-binary, and we have many non-binary bards in our kingdom that I work with. So you know, I can speak to some of the things they tell me, and one of the things that constantly pops up, because remember, not every culture is not a monolith, so everyone is going to have different feelings on the subject. But one of the things that constantly pops up whenever I discuss this topic with them is I really wish people would stop making such a big deal about my gender, in that, can you just let me do my thing? You know, in some cases, some people just want to do the thing in the SCA and don't want to be the token poster child for the trans inclusivity movement. You know, not everybody wants to be the poster child for whatever their marginalized demographic is. And if they want to, that is up to them. And I commend them for having the strength to do with that, because as a minority myself, it's a lot of BS you have to deal with when you have to be the only one speaking up on these matters and you feel obligated to do so because you don't have many other people representing that. So, I mean, there are different opinions about this. I think that we makes a fantastic point when they say, hey, you know, can you just like support us in like trying to figure out what we're trying to do and where we're trying to be? I mean, in my own short time being here in the society, I have witnessed some of my friends transition and come to terms with their own gender identity. And the reason why they were able to do so was because they had supportive networks that let them explore that and let them figure that out in this safe space. And so a lot of this is really just, kind of giving that safe space to a community that doesn't really have a lot of safe spaces to explore these things. And the performing arts have always been a space for people to explore identity and to explore, who they are as people. And I think that that's probably one of the best things that we can do as allies is, let them tell us and work with them in that regard, but also give them the space to tell us these things. Don't do things for people, do things with people.
Absolutely. And I just want to add here that there is a separate panel on the topic of the trans spectrum in the SCA, and that can be found on the DEI page. So take a look at that if you're interested in learning more about how to support people on the trans spectrum in the SCA. So let's switch gears a little bit and move into discussing some challenging Bardic situations and some controversial content that we find in the Bardic community. So how do you kindly end a hostage audience situation, especially with the dynamic of neurodiversity?
So this one has the potential to be pretty difficult. I think that there are a couple of different types of scenarios that we can talk about. If you are good friends with someone who wants to perform, and you and they have discussed this possibility, or them well enough that you can talk to them about it. Perhaps you say, hey, is there a way that you want to signal? Is there something that you want to help you sort of register that you're not getting what you want out of this, interaction with the audience? If you don't know the person, generally you should probably try to defer to the person who's running the circle, because it is their circle. And unless they're abdicating their responsibility, it's really their job to keep the circle going. In a context of performing at a feast, for example, the feast steward the hall steward would probably be that person. But if there's no other choice, or you are one of those people and it's your job to do that, probably the best thing, I think, is to try and get their attention and speak with them quietly, and hope that they're receptive. Sometimes, unfortunately, you sort of have to outlast it a little bit. Without, if you want to not be terribly disruptive and not be cruel, we may sometimes have to sort of deal with it. So I'm afraid I don't have a great answer for the question. I've been thinking about it since it showed up on the spreadsheet, and I've not yet been able to find for myself a particularly good answer if I don't know the person in question.
My approach here is to try to avoid and to prevent hostage Bardic situations from starting so that we don't have to end them. From an autistic and a newcomer perspective, please make the rules of your Bardic circle crystal clear before you begin, and repeat them whenever someone new joins. It will be boring. Please, like Olivia, who explains things and doesn't mind re-explaining them, be more like Olivia, explain things. Be clear about things you never thought would need to be explained, because you, as a person running a Bardic circle, I'm assuming, have probably been in the SCA for long enough to qualify as an old fart. And I say that with great love, and as someone whose parents missed Penzic because my mom was too pregnant with me. As I said earlier, focusing on satisfaction with my own performance is something that I've had to do to combat the anxiety of meeting other people's expectations. That anxiety stems from not knowing what those expectations are. Honestly, knowing that I have a 3-minute limit on my speaking pieces on this panel takes all the anxiety out. Now I know what the rules are. I'm here to tell you that no one can read your mind, and everyone was a newbie once. Be gentle, set the rules, and define what happens if someone breaks them, and then enforce them equally. If you can't shut up your long-winded eldest Laurel telling that story for the third time tonight, please don't shut up a nervous newcomer who's quavering through their first ever performance and deciding whether they want to come back next time. Fairness is the best way to be kind. The last thing I'd say is a shameless plug for a project that is, of course, on the back burner right now, but a Bardic handbook that we're trying to come up with in Ealdormere that has things like an explanation of our rules, protocols, and norms, so that someone who's never been in the SCA before or is coming from out of kingdom knows how we do things and won't be upset, confused, or scared. So explain, everyone's happy.
I look forward to reading that Bardic handbook when it comes out. I hope that you send me a link for it. Thank you so much for both of you for sharing your perspectives on that question. So, why are there so many songs glorifying war?
This is one of those things that comes from the history of how the SCA was founded. It started with a fight, and we have been really focused on particularly armored combat since the very beginning, which is longer than any of us have been participating in the organization. And there are some things about it that can be very interesting. There's certainly a lot of captivating history about war from ancient times through the modern era, but there are also really heartbreaking and terrible things about it that can be triggering and difficult, and also sometimes just boring. Only hearing songs and stories and poems about the same subject is boring. So I would absolutely encourage everybody to take a broader view. I certainly sing some songs about war, but they are rarely glorifying it. I tend to sing about how awful it is and how it's a really bad idea and we should do less of it. But also, let's sing about building fires. Let's sing about baking. Let's sing about a million other things that the entirety of the species engages in that are more varied and interesting.
So I tend to agree with Lanea, of course. Having a breadth and a depth of topics and different things to sing about, I think is more interesting generally than, sad Irish song number 35, which something happens at Bardic circles frequently is you'll get a run of sad, depressing songs, or you'll get a run of goofy, funny songs, and somebody feels like they need to sort of break the pattern, and they'll sing something that's in direct sort of opposition to the previous theme of the previous song. I think that it's an interesting question because I think that anybody really believes that what we do in the SCA is really war. So there's a lot of songs about Penzance or Gulf Wars, or I've written songs about these things. There's Estrella, there's Great Western War. There's all these different SCA large events that we call wars. But honestly, Penzance is so much more than just 2 or 3 sides on a battlefield slugging it out with baseball bats and tin can helmets. I think that glorifying Penzance or glorifying Estrella or glorifying Gulf Wars to me is a little bit different than glorifying, say, the Battle of Agincourt, for example. And my experiences, which are only mine and I cannot speak for anybody else, of course, are that I tend to like the songs that talk about the great deeds of war in the context of the tragedy of war. The Morte d'Arthur is not it's not a comedy or an terribly uplifting story. It's a tragedy. I would challenge the questioner to do a little bit deeper sort of dive on what these songs are and what are they really trying to say. Now that doesn't mean that impact defines that intent defines impact. And it's absolutely possible for people to write songs that absolutely glorify violence and killing each other. I agree with Lanea. It's sort of built in a little bit to the culture of the SCA.
Yeah, I'd follow up on that. If the question is why are there so many songs, two simple reasons are it's easy and we're lazy. So much of how history is taught, especially in North America, where the majority of the SCA is based, is the dates and names. We got some kings, we got some commanders, we've got a bunch of wars. And occasionally, oh yeah, there was a technological development or an interesting person who didn't have something to do with that. But really, the most accessible history is very focused on wars and battles. So it is how we have been conditioned as general North American students to approach history. And as the SCA is a history group, that's going to come into it. And then, as Lanea pointed out, our game began with a tournament. And as Andreas points out, so many of our really big events, multi-kingdom events, are phrased with the language of war. They are, it's Pensic War, it's this, so in some ways it's just easier. It's a quick and dirty topic for anyone to start writing something either SCA focused or historically focused. And we are lazy because that's a language that we're all very comfortable with as far as approaching history goes. Maybe not comfortable with the implications of war, but comfortable with approaching history through the lens of war. It's a topic that is accessible and is very popular within our society, which is also fairly martial activities focused. I think what's underlying this question is, do we have to have so many songs glorifying war? And the answer is obviously, no, we don't. How we get to that point is in what we choose to write and perform. I am completely guilty of writing a lot of martial songs. It's also very easy to make an us to stand against a them and make ourselves feel good about ourselves. But I have made conscious choices over the past several years to not include those in my general repertoire. I much prefer songs that bring people together or interesting stories, mythologies over battle tales. So that's what I perform more often. And I think that cultural shift, if there's a desire to step back from war glory stories and songs, then we have to readjust our own focus. Every single person is responsible to adapt their repertoire or to request from Bardic people to hear more of other things.
Just wanted to jump in a little bit. Absolutely. It is the choices that we make. And I have to say that we're lazy isn't an excuse here any more than it is in any other part of inclusivity. We're lazy and we need to stop. Okay, then let's stop. Remember, please, what bigger stories about society, about rightness and wrongness that your performance is supporting and erasing when you choose to get up and sing or tell that story or that poem, when you put pen to paper with another great story that came out of Pensic. Think, do we need that or do we need another one from somewhere else at Pensic? Something that wasn't the battlefield. We have lots of those. Let's fill in the gaps. And please remember that some of us in the SCA have much more recent war histories in our families than the Normans and the Saxons. And we lost a lot. Pacifists and those who have been harmed in war will not be able to sit through your performance that speaks about it, especially if it speaks about it as something good, something that any kind of good can ever come of, or even something ambivalent and bittersweet. They will not be able to sit through it. Please think about your whole audience and who can't come to the SCA because of our martial focus.
Thank you. So, is there a way that we can responsibly share potentially problematic material? What advice do you have to bards who would like to perform historical works that include but are not defined by these problematic attitudes? Do you think that bards have a responsibility to avoid or contextualize problematic works in order to foster an inclusive environment?
All right. So there's three questions here, really. The first one is there a way to responsibly share potentially problematic material? Sure. Teach a class, or sit down with somebody who's a friend of yours who you know is interested in the same topic. Okay. What advice do you have for bards who would like to perform historical works that include or are not defined by these problematic attitudes? Don't perform them. If they are so problematic, don't do them. However, if it's really important to you that you do them for some reason, as was stated before, be extremely clear about the nature of your circle. So it's not enough to stand up and say, I'm going to sing about something horrible. So if you don't want to hear something horrible, this is your trigger warning. So, I'll wait 30 seconds until people who don't want to be here leave. That's not sufficient. It's not sufficient anymore. It doesn't work. It's not fair, because now you're making the people who may be worried about having a response to problematic material, they have to get up, they have to leave. It's the middle of the Bardic circle or the concert or whatever. It's not fair. So my answer is if you're really going to insist on doing this, set up your own Bardic circle and be extremely, extremely clear about the material that you're going to be covering in the circle or the concert or whatever. And then, do you think that bards have a responsibility to avoid or contextualize problematic works in order to foster an inclusive environment? I mean, yes, absolutely. I tend to come down on the avoid side rather than the contextualized side when it comes to performance. But certainly there's nothing that prevents you from holding a class where you cover these topics, because people can choose to come to the class. You have to provide a class description. If you're just doing a Bardic circle and you stand up and you start singing something terrible, you're not giving anybody an opportunity to not have to experience it.
I absolutely agree. I think something that's very important is anything that could be so offensive or upsetting and could really harm the experience of a person who is part of our community. First of all, if it's going to come up in a class or something like that, it needs to be entirely opt-in. You don't walk into someone's camp and decide you're going to perform the Taming of the Shrew, whether they like it or not. That's just not done. And I'm not saying there is no literary merit to that play, but that play includes a lot of language that is incredibly offensive and othering. And it is not a product of our current time. It is a product from a time when people were significantly more racist and bigoted, and that was apparently broadly accepted. I can't really speak to how broadly it was accepted, but it seems to have been. So anytime you're going to touch on anything that fraught and upsetting to people in marginalized communities, it needs to be entirely opt-in. And I think we also have to be really careful about the language that we use. It's really easy to fall back on terms that would be considered slurs or very offensive, and we need to not do that. We need to not use those words here. Just like I was saying earlier, part of the anachronism that we're dealing with and the creative that we're dealing with in the SCA is that we see what was wrong with the cultures and times that we're trying to represent, and we do better for the sake of our community, for the sake of our members who have been harmed by language that makes them feel othered or lesser or attacked. So that's what I would encourage.
Thank you both for covering that for us. So this next submission came in and it's going to prompt a bit of a discussion. So I'm going to read it as it was. And it said, this isn't a question so much as it is a statement. To me, it's very important that we draw distinctions between the Bardic community and people hanging out around the fire in their camp at night. The former may indeed have some issues with inclusivity, regardless of continuing attempts to make them inclusive events. The latter has some built-in exclusivity. I would love to hear some time devoted to this topic. And I'm sorry, I know I kind of messed up my words in asking that, but hopefully the people answering this question will be able to help explain a little bit of what I was trying to get at with reading that.
Sorry, so there obviously is a difference between the Bardic community at large and individuals hanging out in their camp at night. This shouldn't actually be that difficult to differentiate between. I think where the question is sort of lying underneath is more of how can one identify what is a space for Bardic community versus what is a private space. And I know that this can be hard. It's especially difficult at times because a lot of bards become very good friends. I've personally experienced hostility from people accusing the bards of being very cliquish when the truth of the matter is what you're witnessing is myself and other people who are known as bards discussing things like our university studies or work or childcare. The optics might be that there are those bards discussing their secret bard things. Trust me, we don't do that much. Generally, bards will love to discuss all manner of things. And when we do come together to discuss Bardic things, it's in venues like this. It's in roundtables, it's in discussion groups, it's in classes. So don't try to attribute to the Bardic agenda what can be passed off as this is a social club. There are times where I see that the lines can blur. I'm personally a part of a Penzic camp that has a very high bard population. So the public space within the camp often is a bardic space, but is not always a public space. The easy way to get around that is for people, whether it's the host of the hall or the community in the camp, whatnot, to just make it very clear, gently, tonight's a camp only day, or this is a living room night. Even if people come in and ask if they can listen, you can say something like that gently without being offensive, without being dismissive of someone. And hopefully that will be respected. There are also times where a private camp may be really up for broader audience to come in, or for a group of people sitting at a feast table. start to perform things. Other tables may be willing to, may want to turn the chairs or step up. And if you're one of those people from the outside, approach it respectfully, be non-intrusive, and when there's a break in performance, if somebody stops their poem or has finished a song, ask if it's okay. So many problems will be avoided by clear, simple communication. Just, can I continue to listen? Or would you mind if I also came and told a story? Are things that can clarify these situations and spaces, but be willing to listen to the answer that may be not tonight, or sure, but tomorrow evening is when we're having our open circle. And just we need to try to, like Guoillauc has said, we need to be more clear with people what the expectations are, what the etiquette is. And so we just have to keep normalizing those kinds of conversations.
This is certainly something that can be difficult, especially if you're newer to the SCA or newer to Bardic. I certainly have experienced a lot of people who have been confused about how to find places to perform at more informal times. So I host big Bardics at Golf Wars and Penzig in my camp, and we make it very clear what nights those Bardics are going to be and what sort of material is encouraged or discouraged based on whether there are children there, whether there are people there with certain experiences that make certain types of material more difficult or upsetting to hear. And we do, as folks have discussed already tonight, try to be very clear with what our expectations are for our guests and our participants, and also for our audience, because you want a polite audience as well as engaging and polite bards. Things like mugging the gate can work well, but they're not universally done. I would definitely encourage anybody who's interested in Bardic to just ask the bards you know where there are informal places where you can perform or listen to Bardic, and try to figure out, how to get to those places, particularly at larger events like Penzig. But it is absolutely imperative to be sure that you're not encroaching on people's private time. We actually had to take to putting up a physical gate at Penzig because people were so interested in seeing. We have a period encampment, and it's one of the oldest period encampments in the SCA. So people want to physically go and see that. And most of the time, that's great. And most of the time, if we're singing, we're happy to have someone come in and join us for a little while. But we have to be clear about when it's time to close camp, and that 5 o'clock in the morning is not a great time to start singing loudly, no matter how excited you are to do it. So being gentle communicators who are also firm, I think, is the answer, going in both directions. Ask for what you want, and if someone says no, accept that with grace.
Thank you. So when, if ever, is it appropriate for white bards to perform music or styles from non-European cultures? What impact, good or ill, can such performances have? What harms can be predicted and avoided? Are there other forms or dynamics of appropriation that should be addressed as well?
Okay, so now it's my turn for the organizers to, be sorry that they asked me to speak. All right. These questions at the end of the day are basically the appropriation versus appreciation question that always looms over stuff in the SCA. I am going to be speaking frankly here. I am very tired about being asked this question because remember the thing I was saying about tokenism and being, the model for your culture and your group. I am a very visible bard. I am someone who is very active right now in the SCA who does work in quote unquote New World cultures, in period cultures, indigenous cultures. I do this work in Mesoamerican cultures. So I am obviously the person that people want to reach out to ask all these questions about cultural appropriation. And it's exhausting. It's exhausting because that's the only reason anyone ever wants to talk to me. Nobody wants to come to my performances. They want to ask me about cultural appropriation. Nobody comes to the classes I teach on the subject. They want to ask me about cultural appropriation. People don't want to, know anything else about me because, I'm multiple things. I am mundanely Latino. I am mundanely a minority, a person of color, and I do that work in the SCA. I also am queer. I also have, disability and health issues. These are all things I work in the SCA too as well. I do so much of my mundane work I bring into the SCA because I think it's a really cool way to incorporate a lot of the stuff I do with health and safety as far as performers go in the SCA. It's not something that gets talked about, and I get really good reception from the people that are willing to listen, but nobody asked me to do those things. They want to know about cultural appropriation. I give classes. I have a DEI class on the New World in the SCA. I have that class. I've done this presentation. It's been recorded a few times at this point. And yet people still want to come to me and ask me questions about cultural appropriation. If your concern is asking minorities, how can they not be offensive to a minority, but you have no interest in interacting them with beyond that? You're not doing us any favors. It's actually worse in my opinion. And then the other part is that whole concept I was talking about of speaking for people and not with people. Is the other thing is you get people that argue over, what minorities want and minorities need, or these marginalized people in the SCA need, and yet they ignore us. We could be in the same room as this conversation. I'm going to have to stop here because I can go on endlessly about this one, but it's so frustrating and hurtful that, people don't care about my culture beyond what they can do with it. They don't want to partake in my culture. They don't want to partake in the events I put forth. They just want to take what they can from it and then do it elsewhere.
I just want to add in 2 quick points. That as European descendant people, the burden is on us. We have to do the work. If the question is, when will we know if it's appropriate or ever? The answer is when we've done our research and have figured it out and can appropriately and respectfully approach those things. The second point is that we have to keep in mind that our whole goal in this society is to appreciate other cultures. We are not medieval people. We are most likely not what our personas portray. And we have to acknowledge that that we have no more cultural claim on any one medieval, even European culture than we do on a non-white culture, modernly or medievally. We must keep in mind the fact that everything is an interpretation. Everything should be a goal towards appreciating what that is in the best way that we can. But for European-based cultures and European descendant people who are in cultural majority in North America, we are the ones who have to do the work.
Absolutely. And when the panel came together to discuss this topic, we looked at the question, and the group, I should say, looked at the question, and it was immediately, this needs its own panel. There's no way to cover this in a 3-minute response. And they're right. And we're doing a series of panels on cultural appropriation and cultural appreciation. There's already classes. There are already classes available on the DEI page. Please take a look at those. Zara's done a great job putting those resources together. Take a look at those, but there will be panels coming together for cultural appropriation and cultural appreciation, and they will be topic focused in different areas for that. So stay tuned. If you're interested in joining those, or if you have something you'd like to add, please reach out to me and let me know, because I would love to help raise your voice on that and amplify your voice if you'd like to speak on it. So moving on to our next question. Excuse me. So I want to add, and Zara's pointed this out, it really is important. And as Emer said, it's important to remember that it's our job as allies to educate ourselves on how to support communities that we're not a member of. And we need to do the work. And so I appreciate the panel for bringing that to the forefront as well. So more to come on that. So how do you suggest addressing heterosexism, cissexism, racist, ableist, and patriarchal songs and culture in Bardic? For example, songs hailing to the king but not the queen, only hetero romances and stories, reinforcing gender norms, equating disabled people with evil, and the lack of BIPOC content.
Sorry, I'm having problems with my mouse. Again, this is something that we have to do by setting the tone appropriately at the start. So as hosts and organizers, we need to say, we want to encourage people to be open-minded, to be welcoming of cultures that are different from our own. We want to be welcoming to people of different genders and different sexual orientations. And when people perform works that are insulting to members of our greater Bardic community, we need to call them on it. In some instances, it's a question of rewriting a song, as we discussed earlier. So rewriting a song so that it is about a trans person or about a person who is homosexual and in love with a same-sex partner, rather than, the original version that was presented by someone with a more narrow focus. And I think we have to continue, particularly those of us in leadership positions, to demand better from performers and members of the community. And when people do cross that line, and particularly do things that involve using slurs and really harming members of our community, we need to stand up and say, that's not tolerated here.
So I think most people have actually already touched on the subject. I feel like we've not, if we've not spoken on this directly, we've danced around it. Content warnings help, making sure that the spaces are spaces where people feel comfortable hearing this kind of content if they want to hear this kind of content. In some cases, it is inexcusable, and I think that that's something that we personally have to do the work as a bard. Make sure that, is this something that I'm actually comfortable saying? Is this something that is okay for me to do or say? There is a little bit more of a Pollyanna positivity spin on this that we can put on there, in that there are only so many performances we can make in our lifetime in the circle. There's only so many things that we can do. There's only so much time that people have to hear things. So if we fill that time with more positive work and more inclusive work, there's not as much time for the less inclusive work. The more we introduce things that are less problematic, the more those things get shared and performed, and people like those things, and they're going to start doing that themselves. And you're going to start seeing more of these positive things that are less problematic out in the various bard spheres. You know, the Bardic culture is very organic, and what you put into it will take a life of its own. And one of the things that I've personally experienced and seen is like me doing simple things like changing the gender in like a performance because I wanted it to be queer friendly since I'm a queer person. You know, suddenly I have more people, I've seen people do that same thing. And I'm like, that's really cool. I like that. I like the fact that you took a piece and made it your own, you know, and being able to kind of agree that, you know, things aren't set in stone. Things ebb and flow. Even in period, we have multiple examples of pieces not being the same every single time they are performed and what have you. It is very period to change a piece to be appropriate for your culture or your venue or your performance or what have you. That is something that has happened, that we have documentation of that. We've seen how pieces have changed over time. So I think that it's not as hard as we sometimes feel it is. We just have to accept that cultures change, and the SCA is also a culture. Our culture can change. It can change. It can be more inclusive. It doesn't have to necessarily center around problematic material all the time. There are ways around this.
Absolutely. So staying on the topic of problematic material, as a performer, what's the best way to provide content warnings? And also what's the best way to identify audience discomfort?
So go ahead. Lenea's having a problem with her microphone.
I can go ahead if you'd like. Okay. Wanted to give space. So then I'm sad that Lanea can't go first because I feel like she'd be making better points than I will. But I mean, the first thing I'd say is take everyone's advice here about problematic material. Just start with that. So if it's that problematic that right away you're like, yep, no person of color is going to be able to sit through this, maybe consider you shouldn't be performing it. So that's step one. If you're like, okay, this has some merit, let's continue. Perhaps the simplest piece of this is to then make sure that you're taking content warnings seriously. If you're not coming at it from the perspective of someone who could get hurt by your performance, you need to take that perspective more seriously. Be thoughtful. If there's an obvious trigger in your performance, does it need to stay in the performance? Does it need to be there that way? If you've looked at that and you're addressing something difficult in a sensitive way, this might be the time for content warnings. Get someone else, a friend who is as different from you as possible, to take a look at your performance first, too, if you can. It's really hard to spot our own comforts with things that could cause other people pain. And for practical purposes, give your content warning in a serious tone of voice. Don't be like, oh, by the way, there's a thing in this. So give it. Make sure people got you. They weren't chatting in the back. And then explicitly give people an opportunity to say, no, please, actually don't perform that. Don't expect people, trauma survivors and minorities, to leave a shared space that by making that content warning and then sitting there and starting to speak, you have just accidentally declared as yours, not theirs. If you need to negotiate something, negotiate. That's okay.
Okay, I think I can make noise now. Sorry about that. So this is a thing I have to deal with a lot because since I do a lot of feminist Bardic, I have to deal a lot with questions of crimes against women and sometimes crimes against children. So whenever possible, I make sure to make performances of those pieces entirely opt-in. So any of you who've ever seen any of my concert flyers at Penzic, there's a warning on my concert flyers. Because I know that a lot of people who are survivors of assault and harassment don't have space in their minds or their hearts to deal with it when they're on vacation, and I respect that. For me, it is important to be able to perform those kinds of works, but I don't want them to harm other people when I perform them. So I try to make it very clear what that material is. And just as we've been discussing, be gentle, give people a chance to think about whether they can or want to deal with that kind of material, and make sure to not impose it on someone who is not in the right mental or emotional state to deal with that material. I also try to be really careful about the presence of children. There are certain things that I perform that I don't want kids to hear, because they're not my kids and I don't need to impose that stuff on them. And I remember being a child in the SCA who heard a lot of stuff that's really problematic. There used to be a lot of jokes about assault and harassment passed off as perfectly normal, funny things, and they are neither normal nor funny. So I am glad that things have gotten better, but I still think we have a long way to go, and I recognize that that's my responsibility as much as it's anybody else's.
Absolutely. So the next question that we have that was submitted along the same lines was, I'm concerned about Bardic works that could be accidentally, I'm concerned about Bardic works that could accidentally double as racist or bigoted dog whistles, and how these affect audience. So how can we address this issue in the moment when performed and in the wider Bardic community and culture?
So before I really sort of answer this question, I think it's important that we define the term dog whistle. So, the sort of common meaning of dog whistle is a whistle that only dogs can hear. It's just higher pitch. But there's a political or ideological definition as well. A coded message, I'm reading off of a website here, a coded message communicated through words or phrases commonly understood by a particular group of people, but not by others. And so it is something that politicians might put into a speech that's designed to speak to a specific part of their constituency. I'm not going to pull any examples because that would be very specific, and I don't want to necessarily go down that path here. The question then is, how do we address the issue of people potentially writing songs that can serve as these kinds of dog whistles or signals to people? And I guess there's two ways that can happen. The first way is that you're there at a performance and you hear the phrase. And then there's, if you're like somebody publishes the lyrics online, for example. So the first thing to keep in mind is that if you're at a concert and you hear the phrase, look to your own safety first, I guess, because you might be in a place that's maybe not the safest place for you. And so that's, to me, that's more important than necessarily standing up and saying, hey, wait a second, I don't like that. Hopefully, there'll be more opportunities to address this when these lyrics are published in advance or after an album has been released or whatever. Then it's a little bit easier to stand up, virtually online and say online, hey, these lyrics here, these are not good lyrics. There's something wrong with this. This is not right. I want to talk about this, or I want to stand up to say that I oppose this. And that's, at least potentially safer than doing it at a concert when you don't know who else is there in the audience. Again, it is incumbent, I feel, on peers and people who look like me to stand up and speak out against these kinds of problems and these issues. I think that it's our obligation.
I would say to add to that, because those are fantastic points that I had totally not gotten in that question. I was like, how do I avoid accidentally performing racist dog whistles? So thank you very much, Andreas, for catching the broader context of this, I would just add first that being a good ally also includes keeping up to date with what those common dog whistles are. We can't effectively protect those around us and use our privilege when we have it if we don't know what the dangers are to the people around us who don't have those privileges. You have to get involved and see some unpleasant things if you want to defend others. And listen in, and if you have the privilege to defend others, speak up. Sometimes it is worth disrupting something if you're very sure that something was done intentionally. I can only say trust your judgment, but if it's ambiguous, you might speak to the person later, like Andreas was saying. In terms of your own performances, when I spoke earlier about content warnings, I mentioned that sometimes art's greatest strength is helping us address difficult topics in sensitive and nuanced ways and feel them with our emotional brains too. And one of the best ways that I've encountered to deal with this was something that, I can't remember if we're supposed to name specific people. So some bards I really like in a live performance, which by lyrics alone could perhaps be read as a blood and soil kind of white supremacist manifesto that it's okay to defend your land with violence and axes. But instead, before they began the performance, they spoke clearly and passionately about how that was explicitly not their intent. The song is speaking about a specific Old Norse attitude and value, and the performance brought it forward with a spirit of inclusion. That all people are their kin and they will defend those most marginalized with everything they have. And they made it crystal clear that white supremacists were not welcome to perform or use or really even like their song. So from that example, if you've gone through the steps that I said before and you've made sure that your performance is intended to support a positive narrative, then provide not just a content warning, but a meaningful historical and social context as to why it's important to discuss and think about these topics. And if you're thinking, but it's easy to just not perform racist content, well, this protocol applies to any and all content that even vaguely references religious themes too, which includes a vast amount of the period content available to us. Can we perform content about the Crusades? Yes. Do we need to be loud and clear that we're not supporting conflict between Christianity and Islam? Heck yes, we got to be clear about that.
So the previous two presenters did a fantastic job of covering the major points about this. I am going to add a perspective as a marginalized person that I encounter greatly. And that is believing people when they tell you something is problematic to them and their culture. Because oftentimes what I find when I come across these things is that someone will say, well, this person from X culture doesn't have a problem with it, so it must not be that bad. And remember, no culture is a monolith. One of the reasons why I hate speaking about cultural appropriation is my own experiences and opinions are my own experiences and opinions. They're not reflective of an entire community of vastly different people just because I happen to be the only person that's here in the room of that ethnicity or background. And I really, really struggle with this one because, this question isn't just about racism, it's about bigotry as well. So that includes other forms of hate speech. I mean, we're talking anti-feminism, anti-queer, disability or what have you. And oftentimes those communities will be dismissed because, they're not necessarily as present or there's not as many people there in that area. So therefore, we're not really offending anybody. Or the one person that's here says it's okay for me to do that. This one person gave me permission to say the slur. So therefore, it's okay for me to use the slur. And that's one of these problematic aspects that goes into when we talk about dog whistling is that sometimes we run into situations where we felt like it was okay to do something or say something that was problematic in this regard because somebody previously gave us permission on it. I'm going to use permission in quotations because that's not how that works. we really need to be willing to listen to these communities when they speak up. We are in the room with you. There are far more of these marginalized people than you want to think at first glance in the SCA. We're not nearly a minority as much as people would like to say the word minority it goes.
Thank you for those perspectives. So how do you go about interrupting or censoring problematic songs or performances as a host or an audience member?
So this is a thing that's much easier as a host or a patron or a peer. Use your privilege, use your power. There is a song I will not mention that I dislike. A lot of people feel really uncomfortable with it. It actually has nothing to do with the SCA or medievalism whatsoever. It just, was one of those songs that got sung around a fire. And I made it my mission when I was Kingdom Bard many years ago to make it clear that that song was not something that we would do in a general bardic circle. You interrupt it by being clear. You say, that work isn't appropriate for this circle, or there are still children here. You'll have to save that for your private camp. Be direct and use the fact that you are the local named bard, that you are the host of this, that the bardic circle is happening in your camp and you're a camp member, that you are the host of even a competition, and be prepared to use that power and privilege. Don't be more offensive than the work itself would be. You can be firm while still being respectful, but being crystal clear about what is not going to go down, what is not allowed, and possibly even providing, this is your alternative, even if your alternative is save that for your friends. Make sure that the context is there. As far as censoring works once they've been performed, it would be easy to say, start a whisper campaign, try to make it, but again, direct action is going to probably have the best results. Again, use your privilege. If you are a member of the Bardic community, doesn't matter if you're a peer or not, but if you are someone who feels like you are a part of it and can speak to it, then pull the person who performed the problematic work aside and say, I think this is a problematic work for most Bardic venues. This is why. Here is where I think you would still be able to perform it if you have to. Or here is some alternative pieces that you may want to add to your repertoire that touch on similar things, but without the problematic core. But really it's not just the duty of the host. It's not just the duty of the peerage. Or it's not just your Kingdom Bard's point. You can, if you don't feel comfortable, certainly go to those people and express your own discomfort. Use the context that you've got, but don't wait for someone else to do that work. Is what I would say, and what I've had to realize. I'm very conflict averse, very, very conflict averse. I'm an introvert. I have social anxieties, but learning that you are there to step up is an important lesson for functioning in this society too.
Sorry, again, with this mouse. I would echo everything that Em just said. Any of us with any sort of guest right or host right have the right to say this work you are performing is incredibly insulting to me or to my friend or to a community that is a part of the SCA. I tend to confront those things head on and right away. Once in a rare while, I have to actually interrupt a song that is being sung. And because I so frequently host large bardics at Pennsic and Gulf Wars in prominent places, particularly the long haul at Gulf Wars gets a lot of traffic from a lot of people all over the site. So to my mind, I would be irresponsible if I let certain things be performed in that space. It's my responsibility to do honor to that space and the people who built it and who helped make it such a successful venue. So I have to follow through on that. If there's ever a moment when someone is belligerent and being inappropriate, we actually have members of camp who are willing to step in essentially as bouncers. And of course, we avoid violence. We try to do things as quietly and kindly as possible. But for the sake of the community, we just can't let certain things go unanswered. So we don't. And a number of times I have tried to make it obvious to anybody who comes to those events that we host that if there's a work that offends them and they don't feel comfortable in the moment speaking about it, they could come to me, and 9 times out of 10 I'll know the person who performed it. And if I was out of the room when it happened, or I'm just unaware of whatever button was pushed, then I have the opportunity to educate myself, but also then go out and do the education that needs to happen so that we can avoid those situations in future. Often there is someone willing to help you if you don't feel comfortable confronting a person doing that sort of work yourself. So please rely on the members of your community to help you in those situations so that you're not stuck with that sort of material.
So switching gears a little bit, the plague has given us an unprecedented opportunity to visit each other's performance spaces and experience different regions' norms and expectations. What are the most inclusive traditions and counterculture inclusivity efforts you have encountered in the known world? What gives you hope for inclusivity in the Bardic Arts?
We're having a little bit of technical difficulty here, so I'm going to go ahead and, even though I'm second, I will go first to allow our first speaker some time to recalibrate. So one of my favorite things about this whole pandemic and you know, this whole plague and being able to virtually enter each other's spaces is learning, you know, those aspects of interkingdom anthropology that include people's Bardic cultures, because some groups are, you know, some groups are more filk based and they want to do Broadway and Beatles filks, and some places are a little bit more they're a little bit more intense and want to have some army pride songs. You know, different cultures have different places have different cultures. For me, it's very interesting from an ethnomusicology perspective to kind of learn other people's traditions, but I've also used it as an opportunity to kind of teach relative traditions of my own. So I will try to present works of you know, from my own cultures and my own backgrounds and what have you, that are a little bit more applicable to a room and to that venue. And I really have had so much luck, and people have been really receptive to that, because it allows people to experience something that they haven't experienced before. You know, you'll always have those 1 or 2 people that are going to be a stickler and say, Bardic in my area should be this way and should be this, only this thing. But you're always going to have a bunch of other people that are super excited to hear something new and to experience something new, because they want to grow and they want to learn. And there might be newcomers in there, and there might be newcomers that hear something that they never thought they would hear before. And suddenly they're reaching out to you afterwards because they want to learn how to do these things that you're doing, because it's not something that people around them do. If anything, I actually feel a lot more connected to the Bardic community virtually now, because I've been able to interact with so many people. I mean, this past weekend at Bardic War, I was able to host the first New World Bardic Circle in the society. And that was a super cool opportunity that I never would have had if I hadn't met bards who were also doing these works. You know, for once, I felt not alone in this. And we gave a venue and a space, and people were so receptive that they wanted to do it again. And that is one of the coolest things ever about this whole pandemic. You know, we can be sad that we can't do Bardic the way we would love to do Bardic around a campfire. But there are so many other advantages, and there's so many ways that we've been able to grow as a community. And I think that it's important for us to keep that in mind, that just like everything else, you know, this is an inclusivity effort. This is an accessibility effort. These tools that we have really do help us continually grow as a community. And I'm so happy to be part of that.
It worked. One of the things I've seen that has been really inspirational to me is the profusion of universities that people can access all over the SCA without. Sometimes time zone is a problem, but other than that, it's relatively inexpensive. And we've seen a great deal of collaboration between writers and performers all over the world. And it's been absolutely beautiful to see people put out writing prompts and share positive critique with each other and work on projects together, sharing lyrics and tunes and bringing them together into new pieces, and really writing new songs and poetry and other performance pieces for use in the SCA is one of the best things we can do to make things more inclusive, because that's when we're really going to get great material about people with different gender identities and great material about people with different racial or ethnic backgrounds. If we don't have it in our repertoire as a community, that means it's time to write it. And I think we've had an unusual amount of time to really be at home, at our pens or at our pianos, working in ways we haven't in the past. So I really look forward to the new material that's going to come out of this period of seclusion.
Speaking of technical difficulties, I'm starting to get a little bit distracted, but I would say, like, I loved getting to go to, well, I think it was a Bardic Madness. It was early in the pandemic. And I was like, I wouldn't have made it to this. It's like a 16-hour drive normally. I can't go to Northshield. And I was like, oh my goodness, people from Northshield, I never met you. And it was lovely. And it was like, did you just put together a 3-line thing with, like, you know, congratulations, you're a Welsh bard now, because that's one of the old forms. I'm like, I've been trying to do this for so long, but so just getting to meet other people has been amazing. And, you know, one of the best things I'd recommend is remembering that in the end, we're all just playing a game. You know, let's focus first on welcome and on appreciating each other and on making space for each other. Every kingdom, like was said before, has their own rules and traditions and norms. And please remember that 100% of that has been made up out of whole cloth in our glorious, very silly hobby club in the past 60 years. If someone doesn't get your rule or they point out a flaw in it, the most inclusive and radical thing that you can do is to listen to their criticism. Don't tell people that maybe the SCA just isn't for them. Let's make an SCA that's here for everyone except bigots. It's something beautiful and lovely that I have had the fortune to experience is when Bardic circles celebrate newcomers and immediately offer support and welcome and go, so you're going to come back tomorrow, right? You know, yes, it can be a little intimidating, but often it takes that much pressure on people to say, yes, we like you. Please be that person. Be that person who sees someone timid in the back and is like, hey, did you want to perform tonight? If they go no, don't push it. But call out their anxiety. Do that. And one last thing, something we did here in Ealdormere a few years ago was to have a youth circle where participants got to perform whatever they wanted. It didn't have to be medieval necessarily, and that took a lot of pressure off our young bards. Be silly, have fun, let other people be silly. We'll have a better time.
So I just wanted to add just one thing real fast. In addition to the Bardic work that I do, I'm also heavily involved with my kingdom's university, the Royal University of MidRealm. And one of the lasting benefits that I hope we continue to carry forward with us when the SCA returns to closer to normal functioning, because I don't want to say we're going to return to normal, is the Zoom phenomenon or the online phenomenon allows us in the SCA to provide focused events on things that would never, ever, ever happen if they were an in-person event that was required to make at least enough money back so that it could cover the site. A known world poetry symposium, for example, would be very difficult to figure out in many ways, but we can run it online instead and have people from all over the world participate. You can even have it partly at a site and still use the electronic online forum as a way to spread the message and the availability of the event. And then recording them and having them available for people to look at afterwards, it's transgressive in a way that I think none of us really expected it to be. And I think that we're going to see I'm hoping we see some really great things come out of this in the future. A real opportunity to open things up for people who can't make it to events for whatever reason. Now they can participate again, and that can't help but be good.
Absolutely. So now it's time for us to move into the live questions that we received throughout the panel so far. So one of them was, is there such a thing as a deputy for A&S that focuses on performance arts?
So it would be great if there was like one person in your kingdom in each individual kingdom who had tabs on performers. But there is no official, mandated or even described office that does that. Some kingdoms have organized Bardic colleges or Bardic guilds. Other kingdoms don't. So there's no rule about it that you have to have one or that you can't have one. So certainly, if you think that it would be great to have somebody who was around to be able to help organize Bardic activities for events across a swath of space, it sounds like that's an opportunity for you to volunteer for your kingdom and see what you can do to help improve Bardic in your area.
Thank you. So the next question I have is, where does the new information for courts that recommend amplification fit in?
So I'm not going to touch this in regards to, pandemic and COVID and safety, what have you. That is not what we're doing here. We're here to talk about inclusivity. If you want to talk about that, actually find me, because like I said, I do that work mundanely. So you can talk to me after this about that. What I'm here to talk about is inclusivity. And I don't know how many people know this, but we've actually allowed amplification before in the society. That's not anything new. And I know that for a fact because I have played with groups that have used amplification. Because I first started in the SCA playing in Hafla, and I don't know about you, but I don't know how 2 violins are going to be heard over a sea of 10 drums if amplification isn't used. So I have personally been involved in projects where amplification was used, and I've also seen it used in cases of people that have certain health conditions where they'd like to speak or sing, but they can't necessarily breathe out that long because of lung issues. I know in particular of a situation where someone who has breathing issues plays an electric wind instrument because they have breathing issues, so it's difficult for them to play a regular reed instrument. They still have the talent. They worked on it for decades. It's something they can't do right now. And, we just need to be a little bit flexible about allowing these things. There is a way and there is a space for these things within our society. I think that it's not necessarily as black and white as we sometimes think it is. accessibility devices are a thing. They're accepted. they're encouraged. I will encourage them continuously myself. To the day I die, you can quote me on that. I will encourage the allowance and the use of other people to have accessibility devices within society. And if that includes amplification devices, so be it.
Thank you. So I think this question might have come from a conversation we had earlier. What do you consider the old guard versus the new guard?
So I'm going to answer this because I was the one that said it, and I should probably have defined it at the beginning or clarified it a little bit, because these are terminology that gets thrown around a lot. You know, the discussion is the old guard being previous members of the society, older, more established members that, you know, have traditions and opinions that are set in a certain way. New guard being the newbies who are coming in with progressive attitudes that are often conflicting, or sometimes apparently, I will say that is more correct, conflicting with older opinions. These are terms that get used pejoratively a lot, and I probably should have clarified that when I was saying that I was speaking with a little bit of sarcasm in my voice, because of the fact that these terms get thrown around pejoratively as a way to, like, sometimes talk ill of others, even though on surface level there's nothing wrong with being either an older member or a newer member. And that was something that that was a point I tried to make with my comments about, you know, the generational divide isn't necessarily a generational divide by age, like some people say it is. I do want to apologize because this is the case of me misspeaking and not necessarily being clear with my point and my intention in that regard. If you've ever heard these terms, this is probably why you've heard those terms. And this could also probably be filed under those problematic language that you've heard people throw around in maybe casual senses that could be a little bit, you know, a little bit more malicious than they would have seemed on a first glance. But I do want to apologize, and I want to say that I meant nothing pejoratively myself when I was using these terms.
That explanation was really helpful. Thank you so much for going into detail on that and the accountability. Thank you so much for that. So along the same lines of definitions of things we talked about earlier but may not have explained, how would the panelists define gatekeeping as it pertains to this conversation? What is and what may not be?
So gatekeeping is generally the idea where some members of a group enforce through actions or words a division of those who are within and those who are without. I think as it pertains to this conversation, there may be a lot of anxiety around who is a bard and who is not. And again, we're not going to touch that. Or who is a part of the Bardic community and who is being kept out. So obviously our goal for inclusivity is that people who are feeling kept out cease feeling that way. Feel like they're welcomed, feel like they have opportunities to join in, feel like they maybe have a welcoming hand to participate more within the Bardic community. What gatekeeping is not, as was previously mentioned, is things like having a difference between personal private space and publicly accessible Bardic space. It's not gatekeeping even if it's 5 bards, if 5 bards all sit together at a table in the feast, they're not gatekeeping you out when they talk to each other. That's not a Bardic space. That's a private eating space. If 5 bards camp all together and don't want to perform for you at 9 a.m. when they're having their coffee, that's not gatekeeping. That's having a private space or a personal zone. So just because you're not included in everything does not necessarily mean that there's gatekeeping. Gatekeeping would be more if someone who wanted to also perform was routinely passed over in favor of established performers, or someone who has questions about how to be more involved in the Bardic Arts community is actively ignored. And we don't want that. We want to avoid that. So I think that covers it, I hope.
So one of the things I like to talk about when it involves gatekeeping is not just the way that we establish rules that prevent things, because that's often the most visible form of gatekeeping is saying, oh, it has to be European because that's how the society was formed. That's like a really obvious form of gatekeeping that's fairly weak nowadays, if we're being honest. We moved away a lot from that. We still have work to do, but we're moving away from that. The more subtle forms, one of the ones I like to talk about is tone policing. And that is controlling and trying to make sure that people's language is a specific way that is palatable to a larger audience, even if it is people trying to, speak up for issues that they see. This is another form of gatekeeping that those of us who are from marginalized communities will often see, where, we will try to speak up about something and we're told, well, you're the only one offended, or, so-and-so, such and such person who is also from this community is not offended. So, these are other forms of gatekeeping, because what they do is they prevent progress in the sense that they prevent people from being able to speak their own truths. I know that I have run into this issue, and I have spoken to the people about this issue about how just because, I am a queer person, just because other queer people are championing certain causes doesn't necessarily mean that they're championing all the causes that are relative to me as also a person of color. And it could be a form of gatekeeping to tell me that I need to back down because I am doing this, we've already done all this work. Why are you upset? Progress is being made. It's a form of gatekeeping to tell me that, I don't have the right, or I shouldn't have the ability to speak up for myself in that regard. And I feel like as bards, we could probably understand, silencing a person is one of the most drastic actions you can take. And so that is something that I like to bring up whenever we talk about gatekeeping. It also refers to how we control tones, Maybe this isn't the appropriate thing to say in this space. Maybe that wasn't the appropriate piece to perform here. Maybe you need to find a different circle that's a little bit more inclusive to those ideas. These are also forms of gatekeeping. They're subtle and they're not necessarily overt, but they do involve controlling people's tones and their ability to tell their own stories and their own truths.
And if, as a person who came out as trans almost first in the SCA and immediately had to figure out, now in which room am I putting on my garb, not just where am I going to go pee. And it was actually at Penzic that I first got to use a men's washroom. Structures. What we say does a lot of gatekeeping for everything that we don't say is. If we have said there is, we are looking for people who are performing their own pieces. We are looking for peers here. We are looking for, and if we say non-European goes over here and European goes over here, there are many, many ways that we structure the space without thinking about it. If we put Bardec down a steep hill, we have just gate-kept against everyone who uses mobility devices. It's more complex than simply stating some rules of, these are things we don't do here. We have to be thoughtful about what we are saying we do.
I apologize for the pause. I wanted to make sure that I gave everyone on the panel an opportunity to speak if they wanted to on that, because it's an important topic and it's a big subject. So the next live panel, live question that we had come in was along the lines of, what are the first steps that someone can take to create spaces for multiple cultures and performing styles that are not common in their area? Should performing artists whose crafts don't fit along traditional Bardic lines focus on non-SCA outlets?
So I'd read the whole thing, and I just want to say, first off, to whoever wrote this in, I'm sorry that you're having such difficulties having your performing arts respected and welcomed in your area. I know this isn't a true solution, but right now in these present times of plague, we are also uniquely well placed, as we've been saying before, to attend performance spaces across the entire known world. And someone out there will enjoy and appreciate your performance. Make friends with those people. Make plans with them to showcase those poorly accepted forms of performance and show everyone how much you can truly shine. Don't let anyone tell you that you can't perform in the SCA. I hate to put the work on the people being excluded, but it's the only way that I know of from the inside of the problem. And as we were just talking about gatekeeping, from the side of those with the power to go, but that's not appropriate for the SCA. And as we were just speaking, I was thinking about a number of times that I've been saying that to newcomers of, I don't think that one's going to be a good choice for a Bardic circle. Maybe that one should go later in a Bardic circle, as I'm trying to fit the person to the circle and not entirely thinking about making the circle fit the newcomer. Think about why before you open your mouth or type those words. Who decided that that's not appropriate here? Who is being excluded and why? Is that fair? Is that reasonable? Please keep an open mind and make space for everyone that you possibly can. Again, except bigots, because we've definitely established there are some things that will hurt people, and those ones don't go in Bardic circles.
This question speaks to me very personally on a very personal level, and I will not tell the 15-minute version of the story because we don't have that much time. But I will say that that topic, should I take this outside of the SCA because it's not accepted here, is the very thing that, if I'm being honest, convinced me to compete in the Kingdom Bardic competition for my kingdom, specifically performing in indigenous Mexican language works. Because I was told by many people that, it's going to be a hard sell. We talk about those different forms of gatekeeping and tone policing. Some of those are also just kind of discouraging people, as we said, maybe let's not do that in this space, or maybe that's not the place for this. The second I stopped caring and started doing what I wanted to do and decided I'm in the SCA and I'm going to make of my experience what I want to make out of it, and I'm going to enjoy what I do and not try to conform to other people, is the second I was successful. And I use that in quotations because success is a lifelong thing. But the letting go of the fact that I was constantly being discouraged and trying to find a way to move past that myself, that was a whole journey. That's still a journey. And that's one of those things, like I said, that brings me to where I am today. I don't think I would be sitting here today if I didn't keep doing the things that people told me might not be accepted. And as Guoillauc said, it's unfortunately on the people who are oppressed or being silenced or being discouraged to keep fighting. And I wish I could give a different perspective on that. I really wish I could, because it was a lot of blood, sweat, and tears to get here for myself. So I really wish I could tell you that it'll be easy. I think maybe for other people it can be. Those of us who are in positions to do something about it can make it easier for others. That is the call of action that I would leave this presentation with, is we can make this easier for other people. We have that power. I have the ability, and I have kind of the responsibility to make it easier for others so that they don't have the same problems that I did and the same struggle I did. So please don't stop doing the thing just because it's non-traditional and it's not part of the SCA, because I guarantee you someone will want it.
Absolutely. So now I want to give an opportunity for the panel to make any closing statements that they'd like, share what they'd like to with the audience. So.
I just want to thank everybody for participating. It's been extremely educational for me. The only other thing I'm going to say is that in the resources tab, which is going to be published, the resources list is going to be published. There's contact information for me. If anybody feels like they need help with something, please, all you need to do is send me an email. Thanks.
I want to acknowledge that I've asked a lot of you all in terms of challenging values that you might not have realized until tonight that you hold on to pretty deeply. And let me leave you with something reassuring. We're all going to mess up sometimes, and that's okay. We do it on a regular basis. I was a little bit slow to unmute myself because I was busy making an apology for something I hadn't realized I was doing. What matters isn't succeeding 100% of the time, but how we respond when we realize we've made a mistake. Ideally, we catch ourselves, but often we have to be called out. Take the effort off of minorities to teach you everything. And remember that when someone does correct you, they're bothering because they think you can learn. We're doing this tonight because we believe in you, not because we want you to feel bad. As someone just reminded me this morning, if you're fretting like, oh, but I don't want to mess this up when I speak to this or do that, or is this going to be, well, think about the flip side. What harm might you do by not trying? Release yourself from trying to be perfect, but instead, I ask you to embrace constant learning every day of every year of your life. Humility is a value common across many cultures, not just Christian ones. And if humility isn't a big part of a culture, then being a good host and guest usually is. Embrace humility and curiosity. Know that you'll never know everything about how to do this, how to be inclusive as a bard. So love that and go out and seek to be better every single day. Thank you so much for coming. Thank you for listening to us. Go forth in kindness and please wear a mask. I want to see you next time.
I want to start by thanking my fellow presenters. I think that it's been phenomenal to kind of talk in this process, to get to know each other and our perspectives and what have you. And as I've said, no culture is a monolith. Nobody has all the answers. And so it's so helpful to meet other people and gain their perspectives. I mean, if there's one thing that, I hope that most people take away from this is, learning to talk to other people and ask them questions. And part of doing that work on your own is reaching out to others. I am more than happy to talk endlessly about the subjects we discussed today and other subjects. I have a specific Facebook persona page specifically because I like talking about these things, and I have too many opinions because that's what happens when you're a bard. So I'm more than happy to, be a resource to others. I just also would wish that people would value me as a person beyond just being a resource and just being a symbol of something. Thank you, everyone. Tasokamati. I look forward to, seeing more of this in the future and seeing the work that people take away from this. Remember, no one's asking you to be perfect. Nobody is perfect. It would be just nice to see people try more.
I also want to thank the company that I've had in the planning meetings and in this discussion today. It's been an amazing experience to share thoughts with these people. Thank you also to anybody who is watching this, because that shows an interest and a willingness to engage with these sometimes really difficult subjects. We've barely scratched the surface on what we could do, and because we're all bards, we could go on forever and probably be really happy about it so long as we had our drink of choice. But that should be encouraging. There is more to learn. There's more to discuss. There's more things that we have to say. There's probably a lot that the viewers have to say. So I want to encourage everyone to listen openly, and also to speak up. If you feel supported enough to be out with your labels, use that to help other people. I mean, yes, I am queer. I'm a single parent. I live below the poverty line. I have other interstices of minority groups that have special interests within the SCA, and I want to encourage those discussions further. There are obviously places where I fall short and I need to listen more, and I'm excited about that, and I hope that other people have, and I'm really grateful that in a time where we are more physically separated from both our close communities and our extended communities than ever, that we also have found a way to become so incredibly engaged with people we may never have even met if we were only working outside the virtual space. So really, thank you for all the company that I've gained with this discussion, and I look forward to watching some of the further DEI discussions that happen in the future. And hopefully I'll meet you all around the fire someday.
Oh, okay. Like everyone said previously, I'm very grateful to have been included in this discussion. I'd like to thank our wonderful host and the moderators. I know that this time of the pandemic has been really difficult, but watching the outgrowth of DEI actions has been really, really heartening for me. Like Andreas, I've been in the SCA a little bit longer than some people have, and please, everybody know that our newest member is just as important as our president of the organization. The SCA will not survive if we do not welcome people from who are new members, if we do not welcome people from different cultures and backgrounds, if we do not accept people's gender identity as they present it to us, if we do not accept people as they define themselves and as they come to us. And I'm so glad that people are learning more and are opening their minds and their hearts, and I hope we continue to do that, because I think that's what will actually make the SCA survive. And I want the SCA to survive, because I want to be that 90-year-old creaky bard in a wheelchair who someone drags in to listen to whatever new thing has come around because some young person has been brave enough and creative enough to come up with something. So I hope we're all together for that and we get to enjoy it.
Thank you. Thank you so much to the moderators that helped make this happen. Thank you so much to the panelists who were part of this and shared their experiences and their perspectives. My heart goes out to you. I appreciate you going on this journey with me, with each other, and sharing with the audience. Thank you to everybody watching. And thank you to the DEI office for allowing this to be part of the thing. I really appreciate you. Again, my name is Olivia. I'm from Atlantia. I'm a deputy to the corporate DEI officer, Zara, and more conversations are coming. More panels are coming. But in the meantime, keep having the discussions, keep doing the work, keep making good change happen, and stay safe, and I look forward to seeing you all soon.